everyone. It's Corey Weathers, and it's Monday noon Kansas time, or at least Central Time. I'm back for another Monday Facebook Live to talk a little bit about how I'm going chapter by chapter through the Sacred Spaces book. For those of you that are doing the summer, it's almost fall now, I know, but the summer book club challenge. And we are on the chapter called Embracing the Suck. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, really some of my thoughts on it since reading it again myself. And so I'm going to share this video real quick with those of you that are in the Facebook group that are doing this as a book club study. So if you are watching, I would love for you to share the video, because we are going to just talk a little bit today about what it means to embrace the difficulty of this lifestyle, because it is not the easiest thing in the world, if you haven't noticed already. And if you've been paying any attention to me lately or listening to the podcast, you know that I have not been necessarily in the best space myself. And so this was actually the reason why I decided to pick up my own book again, was because I realized that I needed to do kind of a good self-check, and I was feeling some of the lifestyle and the inconvenience and the struggle of it was kind of starting to creep back into my heart and developing a little bit of resentment again, a little bit of just frustration. And I didn't like that about myself. And I know that when I went on this trip overseas, I was able to kind of root out those feelings of resentment or frustration. And in just life, it's been almost 4 or 5 years now since I went on that trip. And so more life has happened, more moves have happened. And so it was a little bit of resentment that was starting to creep up again. So if you are watching, I would love to know who is watching and where you're watching from. Maybe you're taking a lunch break, maybe what you're taking a break from, so that you can join me just for a few minutes. I'm going to try to keep it about 20 minutes long today. We'll see if I can do that, because I am used to doing sessions and doing podcasts that are around an hour. So we'll see if I can actually keep this pretty short today. But I'd love to know who's watching and what you guys are doing and what you're taking a break from. I see Sierra is watching. Hi, Sierra. Always good to see you. Land of Lincoln. Love that, Kara. So today is a lot about the chapter of Embracing the Suck. And at this point in the book, I am visiting Herbal Iraq. And there's so many things I can pull from this chapter, so many memories, so many thoughts and feelings that came to mind as I was rereading what I was going through at the time. And I'm sharing extra behind the scenes pictures and videos and things from the trip that maybe you haven't seen before in the Life Giver group page. So you can always go there if you're reading through the book, or maybe you've already read through the book and you want to see some of those pictures. They're in that group page. And, you know, one of the things that's kind of been driving me crazy is that at the end of this book, there is this really crazy, amazing point where I'm sitting in Iraq, and I'm actually sitting in the chaplain's office, which was a really unique experience for me, to be married to a chaplain and then to be in Iraq and go to the chaplain's office. And it was everything that I expected it to be. His office, the way that it was set up, is exactly the way I imagined Matt's office would be set up. And if you've been reading through the book, I had shared a story about one of our soldiers, Tyler, during the first deployment, that had died during that deployment. It was a good friend of Matt's, and that was one of the first real difficult losses for Matt that really affected him and still affects him today. And one of their shared moments was actually that Tyler was supposed to sing in the next chapel service, and he had committed to doing that the week before he actually was killed. And that was one of the reasons why it was really devastating for Matt, because he was expecting to work with him the following Sunday, and then he didn't make it to that. But what was really crazy is when I sat in the chaplain's office, and I'd been thinking a lot about Tyler, the chaplain assistant came in and had a guitar, and they asked, would he sing something for us? And, you know, would you believe he actually sang Revelation Song, which was actually the song between Matt and Tyler that Tyler was going to work on to play his guitar at the chapel service that he had committed to doing. And so it was very strange and ironic that that happened while I was in Herbal Iraq. And I have been looking for weeks for that video. I actually recorded the video of that chaplain assistant playing that song, and I can't find it. And I think I'm just not supposed to show it, because I think it was such a sacred space for me in that moment. to kind of feel like things were kind of going full circle, that I was having this experience, and it was not a coincidence that that song was being played in my life at that time in Iraq. And so there are things like that that I am trying to share on the Facebook group page to kind of bring you in a little bit more in a multisensory way to that experience of my trip, and hopefully that adds to your journey of reading through the book. So Nicole's watching from Vincenza. Love that. You're one of those lucky ones that are there. I think that's in Italy. And I say lucky, but I know it's a challenge too to live overseas. So I totally know that. So have you heard of the phrase embracing the suck? If you have not, maybe you're a first responder. I don't know if embracing the suck is used a lot in the first responder world, except for maybe if you're married to a veteran or you're a veteran yourself. But embracing the suck is a phrase that a lot of especially military members use when you're in a situation where it's not ideal. You don't have maybe the conveniences of home, and you just kind of have to embrace it because there's nothing that you can change. It just is what it is. And when I got to visit Iraq, I got to see a lot of the living conditions. I got to see the cots that everybody talks about sleeping on during deployment, and we do, I'm going to talk to the spouses here, the spouses that are, I call supporting spouses at home. I think we do the best that we can to picture in our minds what actually is their experience overseas. And so when your spouse says, yeah, I've been sleeping on a cot, I think we kind of conjure an image in our mind the best that we can of what that space might look like. And so in my mind, I think about a somewhat spacious room or tent with a cot and plenty of space to put your stuff, because, we've seen all of the bags of gear that they take with them. And so we just create this idea, this image in our mind, not even knowing if it's correct. And I think that adds to the gap that we have in our understanding between us and our spouse, because our imagination fills in as many holes as possible because we want so badly to understand what they're going through and what they're experiencing, only to find out that our imagination created something that wasn't even really true. And so I love when service spouses are sending pictures back home, because it does help us as spouses to picture things a little bit better. Videos are even better because they're moving images and you can see things, you can see the space and see the amount of room that's actually in the space when you do a panoramic video of at least your room or wherever it is that you are. And so I highly recommend those of you who are serving spouses or leaders to engage in as many multi-sensory opportunities for families as possible to really close the gap of understanding. We really do want to understand. Our children also really want to understand, but we fill in with our imaginations information that we don't get, right? So we just fill it in and it can be wrong. So embracing the suck is really about how do you embrace when things are difficult. And Amanda, I just got off the phone with her a little while ago, and I've been thinking about some of the things that I was even talking with Amanda about earlier this morning, and talking about what does it mean to actually, from a military spouse perspective, or a veteran's spouse perspective, or a first responder spouse perspective, what does it actually mean to embrace the suck in our life too? Because that is one of those things that they come home different. If they have been deployed, or even some of our first responders, when they go out to work and they deal with what they've got. It's kind of like my kids say all the time, they learn from school, you get what you get, you don't pitch a fit, right? So you deal with what you've got, only to come home to the comforts of home, the conveniences of home. And I bet some of you, I'd love to hear from some of you who maybe have experienced this as well. Your serving spouse comes home. We complain about the inconveniences and the struggles that we're experiencing back at home. That's really genuinely frustrating for us to go through. Maybe the car is not working. Maybe it's that your job, it could be any number of things. It could be the kid's school is not going as easily as you would like for it to go. It could be like me lately and talking about how frequently you've been moving. It could be lots of these inconveniences. And then you've got your serving spouse that goes, is that really something to complain about? Because I just spent 9 months in Afghanistan or Iraq with, a bug net, sleeping in a bug net and eating powdered eggs, right, for breakfast that were cold, right? And so it just creates this understanding gap where you feel like, it's some couples actually end up feeling like we're competing our struggles. Like, whose struggle is worse? Is it the inconvenience of the supporting spouse that's doing the best she can to control everything that she can at home? Or is the struggle to be deployed and be without the conveniences of Western culture in America the worst struggle. And so a lot of marriages end up competing and fighting and having conflict over whose situation was worse, when really no one's situation was worse. Both were bad for different reasons. And you only know what you've experienced. That is yours to experience. There's really no way to compare. And that's why I use this phrase, sacred spaces, because for you as a supporting spouse, what you go through at home is your experience. And there are days that you have barely survived. There are days that it took everything that you had to get dinner on the table and get the kids to bed before you collapsed. And nobody can fully understand but you what your day was like and how difficult that was for you. And that there's specific days, I'm sure, for you that were sacred spaces, maybe even positive experiences where neighbors or friends stepped in to help you get through that significantly difficult day. And you look back on that moment going, nobody could have understood just how amazing it was for a neighbor to come to the rescue, right? And your spouse, that's the serving spouse, they have their sacred spaces over there of what it was like to sit on a mountainside and eat powdered eggs, or that MRE when they didn't know when they were going to get home or back to the base to get a shower. There are just some things that we're not going to understand. And that's why they're sacred. They're set apart. They are not easily understood by other people. And so I think, though, that we can apply the phrase of embracing the suck to our life, regardless of what we're going through. And the thing that I think that, Nicole, so many days like that. I know, right? Totally get it myself. So I've been thinking this week about this phrase, embracing the suck, and thinking about what it was like to visit Iraq and see the cots and see how there was actually several of them bunked up together, and how even the two bunked on top of each other was less spacious than I was expecting. Like, you couldn't even, if you were on the bottom bunk, there's no way you could even sit up in bed. You'd have to roll out of your cot to get out of bed. So there was all these things that I didn't fully get, or didn't even think that would be as difficult. I mean, to see somebody PT, to run and get their run in that morning and run on gravel in their boots and just to get a run in, changed my perspective on what it meant to think about my husband doing PT while deployed, right? It's not easy to run on gravel. And if that's all you got, at some point you just have to embrace the suck, right? And you just have to go, it is what it is. You get what you get. You don't pitch a fit. And so you see a lot of our serving members coming home with an entirely different attitude of embracing the suck. And there are certain things that aren't going to upset them the way that it would upset us. And so one of the things I've learned this week is, if you've been listening to the podcast lately, I've been very vulnerable in my own experience lately of the recent move and how it just was a difficult move for me. We've been moving a lot lately. And I'll be honest, I didn't have a great attitude going into this PCS because I really just was over moving again and again. And knowing that we were going to have to move again in a year, I'll be honest, I was not in the best mood. And I didn't necessarily take it out on Matt, but there were probably times I was pretty close to it too. And it just was catching up with me. If you guys know what that's like, I don't know if I'm the only person out there that's experienced that. Maybe one of you guys are willing to share that you understand that too, where the difficulties of this lifestyle just catch up with you and you just find yourself grumpy and in a bad mood. And Amanda can attest that I was not in one of those spaces this morning either. But then I think about the last podcast that Matt joined me on that I released about a week ago. Was talking about family readiness and how the military often asks us as families to keep being there for our service member and whatever we can do to support them, and that the mission comes first, and just those phrases that kind of keep coming at you. And when I heard that going into the podcast, I'll be super honest, I really kind of wanted my husband to join me on the podcast and go, you're right, this is hard, and they're asking too much, and you deserve a break, right? I really would have liked for him to say that. But what he actually showed up for the podcast that I did not edit out, and if you heard it, you know, is that Matt actually showed up for the podcast and schooled me. And he held me accountable, and I left it in the podcast because it was true and what he said was right. And basically what he was communicating to me was he let me complain. He's a good man in that he just kind of lets things just play out, and he just let me be where I was at. And after we talked about it some, He basically said, it is hard. This lifestyle is very difficult. And there are going to be times that this military first responder lifestyle asks things of you that you don't want to give, things that you don't have the energy to give, things that you're tired of giving. Maybe you're tired of making new friends. Maybe you're tired of seeing your kids have to make new friends. Maybe you're tired of the constant schedule changes. Maybe you're tired of constantly worrying about your first responder spouse's safety. That can catch up to you and can get you really frustrated and get you really worn out. He made the point in the podcast that perhaps that struggle that we all have to go through should bring us to a place where we delve into our community and into our friendships and find the connection there and find our support there. And that perhaps that level of struggle and embracing the suck of this lifestyle is more about finding those in our community that are going through it with us, that validate it and help us move forward. Like maybe there is that friend out there that you can talk to that listens and validates your experience and then says, now what are we going to do with that? Right? Or maybe you're in the good spot and you listen to someone else complain, and instead of judging them for complaining, perhaps you're that spouse that listens, validates, and then helps them move forward. And the thing that Matt did for me that I felt like he really schooled me on was that after he listened and encouraged me to reconnect to the community, he then reminded me of how much of these inconveniences are really first world problems. And I didn't like hearing that. I'll be honest, because I felt corrected, even though I knew he was right. In my heart and in my gut, I knew these are first world problems. The fact that I get to have this lifestyle where I get to have those adventures, even when I'm tired of having those adventures. Perhaps the benefits, I know military get more benefits than first responders, but we also, all of us, get the opportunity to be part of something bigger than ourselves, that we do have a community of people that we get to have relationships with, that we don't get to go through this alone. And when it came down to it, it was first world problems that I was really stressed about. The fact that the military asks more of me is one thing, but it's up to us as a family and as a couple for us to decide how will we run our marriage, how will we run our family, how will we run our household, and what attitudes will we walk into that struggle with. And man, was that hard to hear from my husband, especially in the middle of a recording, but I left it because he was right. I mean, that's one of those situations where it allows me to look back on his deployments. And as much as I can be frustrated with maybe the things that changed in our marriage and the things that changed in him because of those deployments, I can also now look back and go, I am grateful for the things that changed in him because of those deployments, because him embracing the suck over there and having to let go of the conveniences that I have back at home changed his perspective on life. It changed his perspective on work ethic. It changed his perspective on gratitude. And he has brought that vision to us as a family. And he's brought that specifically to me, even when I don't want to hear it. His ability to go, yes, it's hard. And he's not going to negate that it's hard, but there are worse problems to have. There are families out there that have 2 and 3 jobs in order to put food on the table. And even though that this is hard, it can be true that this is hard. It doesn't have to be something that takes us down and puts us into a place where we're only thinking about ourselves and thinking about our own needs and how I wish things were different and better. So Sierra, Sierra is relating to that, and she heard the podcast. Yes, thank you for saying that. I try to be super vulnerable on the podcast and really, if it's true, it's true. And if it's honest, it's honest, even if that means that I get schooled and I get corrected, because I needed that. It cast vision for me as far as what my attitude's going to be. And so it's one of the reasons why I'm doing the book club right now, because it's making me take a good hard look at myself, a look at my heart and my attitude. It's making me get more involved with my community and being honest with my friends and finding that support where I need it, embracing the suck of this lifestyle, and then finding gratitude. And that's what I think embracing the suck is about, is can you find the gratitude to change your attitude from being discontent and resentful, from looking at the negatives in your marriage and looking at your spouse of all the things that they're doing wrong, and instead Look for the things that you're grateful for. Look for the strengths in your spouse, the things that they're bringing to the table that you're thankful for, the things that complement you. Even if the things that are different about them bring conflict into your relationship because you have a hard time understanding each other, it still is bringing a complementary strength. And if you're interested in coaching sessions where I can walk you through the Strength Finder and help you find those complementary strengths so that you're in conflict less, then please reach out. I'd love to work with you. But I can tell you that it makes a huge difference in your marriage when you can see what each other is bringing to the table that is positive, that encourages you to take a good hard look at yourself in the mirror, because that's what your spouse does. They hold a mirror up to you and you get to see a little bit of yourself, and sometimes it doesn't look so attractive. But that's our opportunity to take a look at those things, as difficult as it is, and make those changes and listen to what our spouse might be saying to us, especially if what they're saying is true. So let's see what some of you are saying. Sometimes, Nicole, sometimes it's so hard to hear when we are in the negative mood. Oh man, you know what, Nicole, had I not been recording the podcast, I probably would have responded in a less pretty way to his challenge to me to see it from a first world perspective. And that's true. But sometimes I think we need to remember, so I get that. Sometimes I think, or at least maybe the thing I'm thinking to myself is, how do I respond to my spouse when they are holding me accountable, when he's holding me accountable to something I really need to take a look at? Am I letting my guard down? Sometimes I think it's good and healthy and productive for us to answer our spouse as if the world was watching, right? Or as if our children were watching. Would we really fire back? Would we be snarky? And that's one of those gut checks that I had to do during the podcast, because what I really wanted to do was argue, because I was in a negative space. Like, what if, yes, somebody else has it harder, but I want you to think about how hard it is for me right now, and I want you to sit with me in that. But then I have to ask myself, how long do I want him to sit with me in that before we're both just sitting in it? You know what I'm saying? So by the time I had like a couple seconds to think about it, I was like, I have a choice right now to drag him down further to where I was, or allow his vision casting, even though it felt like he was challenging me, to really ask myself, is what he is saying true? He did let me sit in it, but now he's offering to pull me out of it, or at least him walk out of it, and my willingness to follow his lead on that, because he left it up to me. I could have chosen to stay in that negative space, but I absolutely agree with you. That's one of the hardest things to do, is when you're already in that negative space and you really want them to sit with you in it. And that also brings up our friends, right? Because there's other spouses that know exactly what we're going through. And there are certain things that we can take to a friend that we may not be as easily able to take to our spouse because of the totally different sacred spaces experiences that we've had. And I think that that's healthy too. I've had several conversations in the last week with supporting spouses who've asked me, somewhere it's kind of like the question of, should your spouse be your best friend? And I think there are times in this lifestyle where your spouse is absolutely your best friend because you've moved to a new location and that's all you've got, right? You got each other. But I think it's also healthy for us to have friends outside of our marriage that are same-sex friends, not opposite sex, because I think that gets to a dangerous place. But same-sex friends, for us to be able to talk about those struggles where we can relate with each other, as long as we're being mindful that those friends are not going to let us stay stuck in that negative space for too long, because then we just have gossiping and complaining and that feeding a fire that's probably not healthy for us. Sierra says she needed to hear it. Grace, I've been in such a negative, everything sucks space since we PCS last November. I'm trying to get out of it and enjoy the community, but I don't know where to start. Okay, so Grace, totally understand that too. Grace, you get to be graceful with yourself, okay? We've all been there, and it typically takes about 6 months. The newer of a spouse you are to relocating, the longer I think it takes. But it typically takes about 6 months to reintegrate into a new place and give yourself that chance to assimilate or find those people or kind of get out of that negative space. I think each time we move after that, though, we should be learning from lessons learned of what we've experienced before, and maybe we can get a little bit faster than 6 months. So the good thing, Grace, is that you know that you're in this place, and I think we start by serving someone else. At least that's what I have found is helpful for me. So maybe that means that you take cookies or you take something to a neighbor, that you are the one that steps out. I think we all run the risk of putting ourselves in our homes and going, I'm just going to wait for somebody to reach out to me. I know I struggle with that sometimes. When some of the best connections have come when I have reached out and served someone else, and then that established community where I wouldn't have otherwise even met that person had I not taken them cookies or done something to reach out. Yesterday, for example, we reached out and said it to another family, hey, let's go out to lunch. It would have been much easier to just wait around for someone else to invite us to lunch, but that just taking that risk to step out, even though you know it's like dating, right? Like it's that fear that somebody's going to say no and that you're going to feel rejected. But it turned into a wonderful lunch date, right, with another family. It just took us taking that risk of putting yourself out there. So I'm going to challenge you, Grace, and I would love for you to come back maybe next week to the video next Monday. And I'd love to hear if you actually reach out to someone and serve someone. I know it sounds cheesy, but gratitude journals make a huge difference. So even just if all you do is once a day state one thing in your journal that you're grateful for, I promise you it's going to make a huge difference. Talk with others in the community about finding some of those really great stories like we shared in the last week's podcast. If you haven't heard it yet, there was a brand new family. 1,000 families move here all at once to Fort Leavenworth every summer, and we were one of those families. So everybody's new. And there was one family down the street who their 4-year-old was about to have a birthday party. And of course, this 4-year-old had no friends yet. So she put out on Facebook, hey, if anybody wants to come to a 4-year-old birthday party, we're just going to put out a bouncy house and we'd love to just have anybody. So it looks like he had a birthday party. And 100 people showed up. 100, and they brought food and they brought help and they brought things to do, and the community showed up for somebody in need. And those are the stories, Grace, that I think that we need to remember and look back in our own story and remember the times that community showed up for us or when community was great and helpful, but also the opportunities for us to be that community to someone else. Those are the things that are going to pull us out of that negative space and help us embrace the suck when we have to. Holly listened to the podcast, and she resonated with me. Let's see, the feeling of you're not alone in those feelings, but Matt was great to bring me perspective. I agree. And so that was one of the parts that I was like, I'm not going to edit out the fact that I was frustrated. I'm also not going to edit out what he said. Super vulnerable podcast to definitely share. A little bit of insight into our relationship. Lisa is joining us. Hi, Lisa. Lisa's with Healing Household 6 that gave us a grant for the Life Giver Clinician Directory. So thankful for Healing Household 6. Let's see. She remembers a time that she felt so put off that your neighbors didn't come to say hello. Then she realized I'm not the neighbor either. Once I reversed my mindset, I made friends. Huge in being, that's so hard for me to be the person that steps out. And maybe that's a theme for today is, are you stepping out? And I know I'm going to make an effort to do that to myself today. I think that if I do that just a little bit more, life is going to get a little bit easier. And I'm going to remember how awesome this community is. I mean, even having you guys comment on this thread reminds me of just how great of a community we actually have, and that we are here together because sometimes this lifestyle sucks, right? And we as military spouses do a great job of embracing the suck. We just don't give ourselves the credit very often, and maybe we need to do that just a little bit more and help somebody else, maybe even across the street, who's got something really sucky going on too, if that makes sense. So all right, so that is, I think, the gist of what I wanted to share with you guys today. I'm so glad that you guys joined me and that you have some things to share and it resonates with you. If you're not part of this small group book study, I hope you'll join me. I see my dad just joined in and listening today, and huge shout out to him because the last couple chapters included stories about him, and that just changing my perspective on understanding him as an Air Force pilot was a huge part of my trip too. So that was such a joy to see his calling through his eyes through someone else's experience was a huge part of that trip. And so huge shout out and thanks to him for being an awesome dad and an awesome Air Force pilot who was later a Delta pilot who still fights for good. He's a huge hero in my eyes. So I hope you guys have a great day. I hope that you are enjoying the book if you're reading it again. If you're not part of the book club, make sure you join the Life Giver group page where you can jump in. We're only like halfway through the book, which you guys could read in a day, super easy. Next week's chapter that we're going to be covering, it gets a little bit more vulnerable as we get to this next chapter. The next chapter is Mountains of Grief, where we're going to talk a little bit more about what it was like for me to experience my marriage changing and seeing Matt affected by his deployment. So it gets to a really vulnerable place. So we'll see what we talk about next week. It might be a little bit more about some of the changes that you're seeing in your own marriage and in your own spouse or as a serving spouse. So I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.